I know when it happened, I felt, well, anything I can do will be totally hopeless in trying to reform the United States Department of Agriculture. You know, it's this huge program in the U.S. government. So I just went to farming, and then I saw things that were egregious happening, and I got involved.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish soil-grown crops and pasture-raised livestock under the organic seal. You just heard from farmer and activist Dave Chapman. If his voice sounds familiar, that's because Dave is usually the host of our podcast series. Today is a real milestone for us because it's our 50th episode and the first interview of our second season. We have so many incredible interviews lined up to take you through the next year, including author Michael Pollan, U.S. Representative Shelley Pingree. We're going to get to talk to Senator Jon Tester and activist and farmer Leah Penniman, four-season farmer Eliot Coleman, and both founders of the National Young Farmers Coalition, Lindsay Lusher-Shute and Severin von Scharner-Fleming. That's just to name a few. So many great voices who will be joining us. But for now, let's listen in on the conversation between Dave Chapman, co-director of the Real Organic Project, and our guest host, Annelise Orleck.
My name is Annelise Orleck, and this is the Real Organic Podcast, and I am interviewing my dear friend Dave Chapman, the founder of the Real Organic Project, on his beautiful Longwind tomato farm. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Annelise.
So, do you want to start by maybe telling the story of the moment when you realized that you needed to create something like the Real Organic Project, and then maybe we'll go back to your longer history as a farmer and an activist?
It's funny, I'm not sure I can remember a specific moment. I can remember a series of moments where I started to lose confidence that we would be able to reform the National Organic Program. At first, I didn't even know it needed reforming, and then I started to pull on this string, and it started with hydroponics, and then I pulled, and it got into confinement livestock getting certified as organic, and I pulled further, and there was this huge grain fraud going on. And our hope, genuine hope, was that we could bring reform. And certainly with hydroponics, I thought it was just somebody wasn't paying attention and it was a mistake. And Dave Miskell and I started as two completely naive Vermont farmers, and we started putting out a couple petitions, and we got 1,500 people to sign the petitions, but they included Eliot Coleman and Dan Barber and Fred Kirshenman and Michael Pollan, people who cast a pretty big shadow in our world, and many farmers, 500 farmers.
Will people who are listening to this know those names, or do you want to tell us who they are?
A lot of people will know them. They're just, Fred and Eliot were pioneering organic farmers in America, one of the very early people who started to develop it, brought it here, the idea from Europe, and then started to tell other people about it. And Dan Barber is this very well-known chef who is connected with two famous restaurants, Blue Hill, and Michael Pollan is, I think, the great writer about food in America. And so it was, and Michael has written for many years. They've all been very involved for many years in these issues. And we thought, great, look, we just got given a microphone by these people to talk to the leaders of the USDA, which we did, and they listened. And as we got into these conversations, I started going to these national meetings that I had never been to, and I assumed that they would have no interest in what farmers had to say. And that was kind of true. They weren't they weren't interested, but they wanted to appear interested. They were interested in what we had to say, but they didn't want to change anything based on it. So, we started a reform movement. We started a series of rallies, and we got a lot of farmer voices involved. And I think it was a real return to the root for the organic movement in America. Many farmers who are like, well, this is not what we meant. Yeah. And, we're being kind of held up as the poster children for this thing, but it no longer is what we're doing. It's no longer what we believe in. As it turns out, it's not following the law. Organic is special because they actually got a law that's a pretty good law that does a pretty good job of defining what we meant by organic.
And how did they define that under the law?
How did
the law define organic?
About basically the maintenance and improvement of the fertility of the soil, and following the principles of the law of return and cycling of everything, cycling of nutrients, cycling of nitrogen, cycling of carbon, so that seeing farming as part of an ecosystem and seeing organic farming as something that embraces that ecosystem and participates in it, I think with humility. And the law is very good about it. It's very articulate, and it actually states out the principles, but it also lays out these are the things that we mean, and things like cover cropping and the rotation of crops and improving the soil, things that are the foundational ideas of organic farming. So I was involved in about a 4 or 5 year effort to reform the USDA, and we failed.
What were you trying to achieve? To get greater adherence to the legal definition?
Yeah. At first, it was just to prohibit hydroponics, as had been recommended by their own advisory board in 2010. And hydro had come in a huge way around 2013, 2014. And
how did it appear? And why?
To me, it appeared as perfect tomatoes in the supermarket.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, gosh, these are beautiful organic tomatoes from Mexico. And they're really cheap. They're doing a pretty good job of growing these, except they don't taste any good. And I asked around. I actually know a lot of hydroponic growers in the world. And they said, oh, those are all hydroponic, Dave. I'm like, well, that's not right. We all settled this years ago that they shouldn't be called organic.
And do you want to summarize why hydroponic can't be called organic?
Yeah, sure. Hydroponic means that the plants derive their nutrition from a liquid feed. That sometimes some kinds of hydroponic happen with the roots hanging in the air and they mist it with a liquid feed. Some happen with the roots in water and the water has the liquid feed. Some where they're growing in a pot or a container of shredded coconut husks or something like that, and they pour on the liquid feed in the irrigation. It's all hydroponic. And it's almost the perfect example of chemical agriculture, which that is the philosophy of chemical agriculture is we, humans, now understand how to process chemicals and in a way that we can give them to plants and give them exactly what they need. And we know how to do that, and we can get higher yields from it. And this was the revolution. This was the Green Revolution. It was a little more to it than that, but it's the basic crux of the matter is that we can give the nutrients that plants need. We can treat them in a laboratory and then in a processing plant, and we put on the nitrogen, the potassium, the phosphorus, the trace elements, and the plant grows quickly, and it looks gorgeous, and the yields go up. There are problems. And so now chemical agriculture is always married to the chemical control of the unintended consequences of the problems. So because the nutrition actually isn't complete, the plant is more attractive to insects, it's more attractive to diseases, it's more prone to disease. It's very much like a person. If you go and you eat at McDonald's 3 meals a day, you will put on a lot of weight. You will get big. So if you interpreted getting big quickly as health, then you would go, okay, this McDonald's thing is working for me. And, but of course it isn't healthy. And so somebody eating that diet is going to need a lot of medical care and a lot of medicine, which is like chemicals, and they're going to be prone to a lot of problems. So that's chemical agriculture. And they say it's okay, we got a solution for the insects, we got a solution for the diseases, and we got a solution for the weeds. So we can spray an herbicide. And it's a complete system, and it's based on the philosophy that we know best. Father knows best, right? And organic, real organic, is based on the principle that we don't know best, that we're dealing with these really marvelously complicated natural systems in which the plant is getting all of these secondary metabolites as part of its nutritional load and as part of what it has evolved to need in order to be healthy, and that it then has different secondary metabolites when we eat it or the animal eats it, and it provides different health for us and for the animals, and it has a very different impact on the ecosystem, on the climate, on the water. The whole thing, it's a marvelous package deal. So, and maybe you don't believe in it. There's lots of proof. You can prove these things, but let's say there's lots of scientific evidence. Some people will say, well, I don't agree with that. I have some other scientific evidence. So it's a belief system. I believe it's true. I believe it's important to people, but it's fine. Somebody might not. When we created organic movement, it was a group of people who believed this was better for the planet, better for people, better for the farmers, better for the soil, better for the animals, and offering it to people who agreed with those beliefs. And they could go to the store and they could say, I will pay a premium. I will pay a little more for that because I believe it's better for me, or I believe it's better for the farm workers, or I believe it's better for the neighbors. There are a lot of reasons why you might choose to pay a little bit more. It's kind of like we had a conversation about labor standards for the people who work, say, in the garment industry. Well, if the people who are buying clothing say, I'm willing to pay a little bit more because I trust that this company is telling the truth when they say the people who made this were treated better, were paid a living wage, were protected from unsafe working conditions and sexual harassment and all these other things, then you have a thing where the marketplace is enabling a producer to do something that is better but costs more. It does cost more to pay your workers more. It does cost more to have a safe working place. So the same is true for organic.
So tell me about the other two dimensions of what you formed this organization to protest against. And then maybe we can go back and get your history, and then we'll come back and talk more about the Real Organic Project. So
sure.
Concentrated animal lots and the grain fraud.
So hydroponics, which is soilless growing.
Yeah.
And I will say that in the case of hydroponics, I absolutely believe that food grown in fertile soil is healthier. But to call it a protest movement, I'm not protesting hydroponics. I'm protesting calling that organic.
Okay.
Right? So I don't see the Real Organic Project as primarily a protest movement. I see it as the creation of an alternate reality, an alternative to the chemical system. All right?
But it's defending what you see as the proper definition of organic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the things, and all of these things in the marketplace are denied that they're happening. So the big hydroponic people, the biggest one in the world is Driscoll's, by far, and they're growing a lot of berries hydroponically. The biggest for tomatoes, is Wholesome Harvest. And these are big companies. I mean, Driscoll's, I don't know, I think they're a $2 billion a year company. Not all organic, but a great deal of their production is organic. They are 70% of the organic berries in America are Driscoll's. It's essentially a monopoly. I think Wholesome is a mere $100 million a year. But they're big companies, and they have a lot of power and muscle. So if you write them and ask them, do you grow hydroponically? You will get an answer that says, no, we do not. But they do. By the simple definition that I use, which is the common meaning of the word, is the nutrition of the plant supplied as a liquid feed? They do. So I call that fraud. I'm not saying that they're bad people or bad humans. I actually happen to like the person that I know who owns Wholesome. And I'm sure that the writers at Driscoll's are nice people and they're good to their kids and grandkids. I'm not saying that they're evil, but I do believe that their companies are perpetrating a fraud on their customers. So the same is true with the livestock. Animals that are grown in concentrated feeding operations, they're called CAFOs, C-A-F-O. A CAFO means all the animals are concentrated in an area and we bring the food that they eat to them. In nature, animals go out and wander around. And so cows evolved to live on pasture, on grass and various legumes and plants. And they go out and they eat it. And they poop in the field, and it's a very good system. A more financially advantageous system is to basically put them in a fenced-in area, a small fenced-in area, and feed them there. And you grow the food wherever. Some of it's being grown down in the, Brazil in the Amazon rainforest. And they bring the soy and the corn in from great distances sometimes it's closer. And then they feed all these animals in large holding operations. So the biggest organic dairy is Aurora. There's a big story about it in Washington Post, and their biggest facility is in Colorado, or it was their biggest. And at the time of the story, they had, I think, 14,000 cows in confinement. And wow, you can't get 14,000 cows out to pasture every day. You cannot. It's impossible. It's physically impossible. It's like if you had a subway service and you put the cows on it and they could go out 3 miles to the pasture and then come back. Okay, but that's not how it works. Yeah. So these are confinement operations. They're like concentration camps. They imprison the animals stand there and they bring the food in, and it creates lots of problems. It is how conventional meat, milk, and eggs are produced. It is not meant to be how organic meat, milk, and egg is produced. And yet, the majority of milk, I would say, and the vast majority of chicken and eggs is produced in confinement now. That's certified as organic. Shouldn't be. Should be against the law. The law can't seem to enforce itself. That's a pretty big deal. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars of industry. There was an animal welfare reform law that was pushed through, and it took years of reform and negotiation. So this was an attempt at reform because the large poultry producers had found a way around the law. They'd found a loophole, and so they were giving outdoor access in a giant roofed-in area with screens on the sides. The animals never went outside, and they said that's outdoor access. And basically they could wander, some of them, not many, but some could wander out to the screened porch, and they call them porches. So that's an example of how a corporation figures out how to get around the letter of the law. So they made a new law, they made a new rule to prohibit that, and it finally made it even all the way through the USDA. And the last week of Obama's term in office, and the first day of Trump's term in office, they pulled it for study, and 3 or 4 months later, they rejected it forever.
Your definition of organic,
My definition
beef
of organic.
and poultry and
that was
milk
almost entirely
production.
poultry, that one rule.
Okay, that one rule.
But beef's another one. Most beef cattle are grown outside on grass, and then they finish them for the last number of months in a CAFO, in a confinement operation. So all these things are happening. Let's just talk about it for a minute, because it's kind of painful to me. I don't know if you've tried to get organic eggs in Vermont, but they're pretty hard to get. I'm talking about organic eggs from a small producer. You can go to the supermarket and get certified organic eggs. But something that is grown from chickens that run around on the grass and fed organic grain, you almost can't get them. And the reason is there are a lot of organic farmers and they have some chickens, but the chickens aren't certified organic. And they say, we can't afford to feed these chickens organic grain and compete with the CAFOs. We can't afford it. People won't pay the price because people are used to organic, so-called organic eggs. I don't know what they're charging, $3, $4 a dozen, right?
Sometimes more.
Sometimes more, but you can always get them at that price at Walmart, right? So that sets the base price of what people expect an organic egg to cost. Well, okay, the kind of egg I'm talking about costs significantly more. I'm not talking about how to make food cheaper.
Right.
And that's a whole other conversation that I'm happy to have. But it's not cheaper, although a number of people say, yes, it is. You know, because if you calculate in, let's not even get elaborate, and let's not talk about climate change. Let's just talk about healthcare.
Yeah.
So if you factor in the healthcare consequences, I believe those expensive eggs are cheaper.
Okay. So we've got concentrated animal feed, and then the last strand you mentioned, motivating the Real Organic Project was grain fraud.
Yeah. So again, the Washington Post did several big stories on this. And Peter Whoriskey, who is a kind of personal hero of mine, because he does this kind of investigative journalism. We can talk about that if we have time. It takes some courage to do that. So he tracked down these tanker loads, these full ships, massive ships coming from Eastern Europe. I mean, the ships were coming from Turkey, I guess. And they came to the U.S., and he proved that when the grain was loaded on the ship, it was conventional grain. When it got to San Diego, or wherever it was going, I don't know, maybe it'd be going to the East Coast from Turkey, I don't know. It was certified organic. Like magic, it turned organic on the ship. Millions and millions of dollars of grain on this ship. It's not nothing. And the value of that grain had multiplied a number of times over during the trip because it turned organic. This is happening on a systemic way. It wasn't like a one-for. It was happening, it's been tracked, but it's mostly not been tracked by the USDA.
So, but didn't they have to become involved to certify it as organic?
They approved the certifier who certified it, which was, I believe, a Turkish company in that case. And
so was somebody...
and that Turkish company would have certified another company to work for them. So there's this long, convoluted chain. Yes, the USDA could have said, we will no longer allow this company to certify for us, but they did not. They did not.
Even after the story
Even
broke.
after this. So it's their job, of course, to do this. They're not only not protecting the eaters, they're not even protecting the American farmers. Who are they protecting is a good question, because they are protecting some people.
Well, it sounds like there's some kind of bribery scandal in that.
Sounds like it might not be as straightforward as a bag of money. It might be as straightforward as a campaign contribution to somebody in the House or in the Senate, and just saying, we hope that you'll do things to support these large CAFO producers, and it might be that they get the idea that maybe cheap organic grain, so-called organic grain, is a help to them. You know, there's a reason that these eggs from the CAFOs are so cheap, and one of them is it's a lot cheaper to pack animals together in a box. But another one is it's a lot cheaper to feed them cheap grain that isn't really organic. So
so this grain was not grain that was going to end up on your or my dinner table. It was animal feed.
it was animal feed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And amazing that we're importing organic grain to America,
Right.
which is massively a net exporter of grain.
Yes.
We're like the breadbasket of the world. We're so good at growing grain, and yet somehow we can't compete with these people for organic grain. So this is a complicated ball of yarn.
Yes, it sounds like it. So tell me, I mean, we seem to really be doing the Real Organic Project. So let's go forward, and then I'll go backwards in your life. I'm wondering about how you went about organizing a coalition. How did you articulate what you were aiming at? Who became involved? Who's involved now? How did the organization grow?
So before we were an organization, we were a movement, and there's always been an organic movement. That's how we started. When I got certified, there was no organic market. So I didn't get certified because I was going to do me so much economic benefit. I got certified because I was part of a movement. I believed in what I was doing, so did everybody else in it. And that movement has continued and grown. And I think that there's been confusion within the movement as the USDA got involved in certification. Quite a while ago, after the passage of a law, they became in charge of organic certification. It wasn't all bad news. You know, they certainly...
When was that? 80s?
No, later than that. I ought to know. I think that the actual creation of the National Organic Program was around 2000. I'm very weak on my history, on my dates, but I believe that's right. And I remember it because I remember I was opposed to allowing the USDA to become involved in organic certification. They hated us.
Right.
I mean, really, they had real contempt. And they didn't want it either. It was kind of thrust on them. And the intentions were quite positive, in my opinion. You know, our own Senator Leahy was the champion of the Organic Food Production Act. And the goal was to grow organic, protect organic from fraud. That was the goal. And they put millions of dollars into that. And as a result, I think it did help the organic movement to grow. But in the process, I think that people started to be confused about whether the USDA has the right to define organic for the movement, or whether the movement should be defining organic for the USDA.
That's a very important distinction.
It is. And what was happening is that the USDA kept over and over making definitions and decisions that were in conflict with what we believed. And so instead of working to build the organic movement, the people who were paying attention were spending all their time trying to reform the USDA, the National Organic Program, which is a tiny little sliver of the USDA. And I mostly just call it the USDA because people get confused with the initials. So there's a group of people, 200 or 300 people that I didn't know anything about, who have spent the last 15 years working on reform and working on protecting the government integrity, you know, the integrity of the government program. Mm-hmm. I was not one of them. I was a farmer, and I was farming, and there's not that many farmers involved with that. Farmers farm, they don't have much time, they don't make much money, and you know, they're kind of up against it. It's fine, and the people who are drawn to that are kind of crazed workaholics, and they just work. But they're not very good political organizers. I know when it happened, I felt, well, anything I can do will be totally hopeless in trying to reform the United States Department of Agriculture. It's this huge program in the U.S. government. So I just went to farming, and then I saw things that were egregious happening, and I got involved.
So when you got involved, I mean, did Real Organic Project embrace those who you said had been working for some time to reform the National Organic Program, or did you bring in a coalition that was outside of that? Because you said that very few farmers were involved, and I assume most of the people in your movement now are farmers.
It's a great point. The leadership of the Real Organic Project is all farmers. We're a farmer-led movement, but absolutely we are embrace and are partners with and in coalition with the many nonprofits that have been working all these years for reform and integrity. So they needed us,
right?
And we need them. These are committed, dedicated, really bright people. They have lots of skills about things like how do you sue the government and things like that. But Real Organic Project, which still does work on reform, but that is not our mission. So that is a departure. Our mission is to create an alternative. And more than just to create an alternative label, it's to create a movement that isn't confused about who we are or what organic means. And we'll do our best to bring the government along with us, but we're not following the government. We hope the government will follow us.
But you're not lobbying the government to follow you?
Sure we do. Yeah, we're lobbying, and I talk to senators and I talk to congresspeople, and I'll talk to a president if they'll talk to me, But the point is, to be honest, Annelise, after this, we had this massive defeat in Florida back in 2017. It was a big vote, and it was an advisory board, and we thought surely we can get this passed.
What were you trying to get passed?
We were trying to basically reaffirm the 2010 recommendation that hydroponic cannot be called organic.
Okay.
And it was a hopelessly muddled mess because those large companies that I talked about who said, we're not hydroponic, so their lobbyists, who represented a great deal of the organic industry, said, they're not hydroponic, they're container growers. All right. And now these poor people on this advisory board, who are basically a bunch of civilians. There were a handful of farmers, and otherwise it was a bunch of nice people who didn't really know what people were talking about, and they're struggling to understand and keep up. Some of them were scientists, and some of them are consumer representatives, and some are corporate representatives, and some represent supermarket chains. And they don't understand these things. They don't even understand what organic means.
And they're the National Organic Standards Board.
And they're the National Organic Standards Board. That's right. And they're chosen.
Who appoints them?
By the Secretary of Agriculture, who is not our friend.
Right.
Nor was he our friend under Obama. Mm-hmm. So Tom Vilsack was not our friend. He was the Secretary of Agriculture from Monsanto, right? And Sonny Perdue is certainly not our friend. Yeah. And, we don't have to vilify them. They're just ignorant. They have no idea what we're talking about. They don't believe it. And so their decisions are really focused on how do we increase the sales of American agriculture. And as it turns out, of agriculture from places like Mexico. They're not partisan in that way. So they're the corporate, they're the, United States Department of Agribusiness. That is what they're there for, to grow the business of agriculture. And that means that they naturally bias towards very large producers, of course.
So you have this movement, you've brought in all these farmers and you've allied with these nonprofits, and you say you're not just in the business of trying to change law or lobby the USDA, but more to create an alternative. How has your movement created an alternative?
So after Jacksonville, after the Florida vote that we lost, it didn't create a new recommendation. It just defaulted to the 2010 recommendation that they ignore. So we're back to them, the USDA ignoring all the recommendations from the advisory board in any case.
Yeah.
So after that, I had gotten to know many of these people who work for the nonprofits. And I also had gotten to know a lot of farmers, as we had 60 farmers come to Jacksonville, Florida from all over the country. That's a lot of farmers to go to a USDA meeting, or organic USDA meeting. It really is. It never happened. Everyone was like, oh my God, what are all these farmers doing here? And they all testified, except for Elliot. He refused to testify because he said, I don't recognize their right to make this decision. And I respect that. But the other 59 did testify. And they testified eloquently about what organic meant. And most of them did not have a horse directly in the race. It's not like they were greenhouse growers. I am.
Yeah.
Right? They had no direct economic impact, but the integrity of organic meant a lot to them. And ultimately, that would have an economic impact, because if people don't respect it, they won't pay that little extra premium in the marketplace, and so you can't afford the extra cost of production. So in that process, we built a movement. We brought people together. But at that moment, after the vote, I mean, there were people crying. People called me, they were crying. From around the country, people who had worked to try and build an organic brand in America that could be trusted for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and they thought, we've really lost it. It's like we can't even get them to say organic must be grown in the soil, right? We can't stop the certification of the CAFOS that have been tried and tried. We can't even stop the grain fraud. And so what I saw was this kind of big meltdown of depression and overwhelm, of people feeling like, what can you do against that hideous strength, to quote C.S. Lewis. And that was one of the pivotal moments where the Real Organic Project was formed. And afterwards, I came back to Vermont, and I think 9 Vermont farmers went down to Florida, and we had a meeting of farmers, very impromptu. We just called some people up. 30 farmers came together, and they were a lot of the real leading voices in organic agriculture in Vermont. And we said, what are we going to do, folks? Are we just going to shrug and lick our wounds and say, well, that we've lost it, or are we going to do something? And the absolute consensus was, we're going to do something. Okay, shall we create a label? Let's create a label that means Real Organic. Okay, is it going to be a standalone or an add-on? Add-on to the USDA label. And it's really interesting. The majority of farmers wanted it to be a standalone. So they wanted to say, no, we're not going to participate in this anymore. After the meeting, those of us who pursued this and tried to really build it up and make it happen felt that it would be too divisive to the organic movement if we said we're not going to embrace certification as a foundation, the certification that we had spent so many years building up. And there's this huge apparatus around this. There's a lot of people making a living inspecting and certifying, and good people, and some not so great, but mostly good people, and people who believe in it and want to do it. So we decided that we would create new, very, very simple standards must be grown in the soil, must maintain and improve the fertility of the soil, just the law, right? Cannot be a CAFO, just the law, right? And we said, if you can meet these, and we had a few other, we created some greenhouse standards because that had never been done by the USDA. And we addressed the issue of split farms, and we really limited whether you could say, well, I've got 100 acres of broccoli that's conventional, and I have 100 acres that's organic. And we said, God bless you. You can be certified with the USDA, but not with the Real Organic Project.
Okay.
And so that was how we started. And out of that grew the Real Organic Project, and we now have a label, and we have a program, and we have almost 500 farms certified now after 2 years. Yeah, it's happening. I don't see any reason why we won't reach many thousands of farms.
So it's expanding.
It's expanding just as fast as we can raise the money. We don't charge farmers to get certified. I call this the Danish model.
Why?
God bless Denmark. They don't charge for certification in Denmark. The government pays for it. And the government gives a great deal of support to organic agriculture. And it's because they believe that organic agriculture brings great benefits to all citizens, not just the ones who choose to eat organic food. They believe it's good for water quality. They believe it's good for air. They believe it's good for climate. And they do believe that it's, let's get people eating better food. So they have set aside, I think, $150 million over 5 years, which in America would be about, in our economy, the equivalent of about $19 billion. Now, $19 billion is still a very small program in America, but it would be transformative if $19 billion was committed to growing organic, and especially to growing real organic. And in Denmark, it is real organic. So I love that, and I thought, well, I don't think we're going to get the government to do that for a while. So let's start to get the taxpayers to do it who are willing, and to donate the money, and to support the farmers who, by and large, are not making a great living. And one of those nonprofit people, when I asked him years ago, Michael Sly, I said, do you think that we should start a program? And he said, I think maybe we should. He said, but it must not be on the backs of the farmers. They carry too much weight already. So here we are, trying to raise money, like everybody, trying to do something good in the world. And but we do a great deal with very little money.
Where do you raise money? Who supports this?
We have many small donors.
Mm-hmm.
People just send us checks, or they go online and make a $50 contribution, or $100, or a $500, or $1,000. We also have some foundations that support us. The biggest by far is the Latner Foundation, and they have really, they believe that what we're doing is going to transform the world, and I believe it too, but they put their money where their mouth is, so we're very grateful for that. There are a handful of corporations. We won't take a lot of corporate money. We have a fundraiser, and we just kill them because we go, we won't take money from them. We won't take money from them. The people who have a great deal of money are the ones it's easy to raise money from. And so it's complicated. We sort of live in this self-imposed poverty as an organization. But we get a little bit of money from Patagonia. We get more money from Dr. Bronner's. We get some money from Nature's Path. So those are 3 corporations that we respect, and we believe that their intentions are very positive and good. I would point out that they're all family-held corporations. Mm-hmm. So it appears that something bad happens when you go public.
Shareholder value.
Shareholder value.
Yeah.
Right.
It becomes the driving force.
And these corporations all have people who say, I believe in this.
Yeah.
So I think we should do this. And they have the power to do that.
That's great. So take me back, Dave. Take me back to you starting your farm career, and how did the philosophy and worldview evolve that brought you to the place where decades later you started the Real Organic Project?
When I started farming, it was a very exciting time. It was the early 70s, mid 70s in Vermont. And I had grown up actually on a dairy farm in Pennsylvania, but I never imagined that I would farm for a living. And when I came here, there was like just all this exciting things going on. And it was young people. It was really fun for me to be with. And when I actually started to farm, and it was vegetable farming, I just loved it. It was just the best work you could do. I didn't know how to farm. I knew how to drive a tractor from growing up on a dairy farm, but I didn't know anything.
How did you end up farming?
Well, okay. What happened was I got a team of oxen. I got 2 calves, and I raised them. I was logging at the time, and I thought I was the cutter and somebody else was skidding with a horse. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll train some calves to be team of oxen, and I'll do some of the skidding. That looks like more fun than cutting. And by the time they were big enough to pull anything, I had retired from logging as being dangerous and unprofitable. And so I went into farming, which was unprofitable but not dangerous. And in fact, just lovely work. And I went through that process that so many of my peers were going through. Most of the organic farmers of that generation were first generation farmers. Not all. There were some who, like Francis Tickey and Paul Muller, who grew up on farms and got this crazy idea. It was Vietnam and protests, and it was a wild time, and they said maybe we should do it differently. But for me, I didn't know anything about growing vegetables, except that as soon as I started to do it, I loved it. And the first thing I did was go to work for Jake Guest, and who was an older, more experienced organic farmer. And he'd done the same thing.
Yeah.
He'd been on a commune and started figuring it out, didn't have any idea. And, we tended to read a lot. So, Jake read a lot and he lent books to me. And then after a year working with Jake, I went off on my own. I still knew very little, and I certainly didn't know how to make a living, but I lived pretty cheap back then. And I met Elliot Coleman, and it was one of the great friendships of my life. And, we never had any economic dealings. He just taught me. It was just, it was, the agricultural dad you always wished you had. I had. I was really lucky. And I shared with Elliot a love of books and reading. And so he lent me many books out of his amazing agricultural library. I think it's one of the best organic libraries in the world. He is still out there searching and researching and finding new books. And so I actually farmed with my 2 oxen for...
Had you bought a piece of land by this point?
I was on rented land.
Okay.
And then I came to this land, and at first it was just that little sliver up front. It was about 5 acres, I guess. Doesn't look like 5 acres, so maybe it was a little less. And I sold the oxen, and I bought a little tractor the first year because 5 acres was a little more. I'd farmed 2 acres with the oxen before, and this was a little more than I thought that they could keep up with. So I got a tractor, I got weaker, I got deafer. I mean, these are the prices you pay for sitting on a tractor. But yeah, and the farm grew, and we started by going to farmers markets, and they didn't have CSAs back then, but we went to the local farmers market that was really just starting up. And
at this point, you were growing many different kinds of vegetables.
We were growing a complete diversity of vegetables. Yeah. Even from the very first year, actually this was the first sliver, and from the very first year, we put up 2 little greenhouses, 2x4 greenhouses. Terrible design. Everything about them was wrong. And I read a book in Eliot's library about growing organic greenhouse tomatoes. And so it was like a cookbook, and I was following it as best I could. And everything was a disaster. Everything was a failure. I still worked out some back then, so I would work in the winter and stuff at other things. Anyway, I got better. I learned. And eventually we bought the piece in front, so we had a place for a roadside stand. And that was what we did for a long time. Roadside stand, farmer's market, a bit of wholesale. We got much better at growing tomatoes. We grew everything. We grew, everything from cut flowers to corn to melons to garlic to everything that we could think of. We even had a little artichoke crop idea we got from Eliot. So.
And you had a bunch of people working for you at that point?
We started a couple people the first year, and then it got more and more. And I think at the peak of the roadside stand, we probably had about 15 people working here. I didn't have any, not only did I not have any farming skill, I didn't have any business skill. So, like everybody I knew, we were just figuring it out. And some people were lucky enough to survive. Some people had more cash reserves than others. That helped, for sure. And as we got better, didn't have to take other jobs. I could make a living farming. And eventually the farm changed because I started getting kids. And it was too much for me to deal with a baby and to try and run the farm. They're both huge jobs. Mm-hmm. I worked all the time on the farm, like so many farmers, but I really wanted to be involved in raising this kid, and it was hard for me. I wasn't one of those people who said, "Oh, this is just so wonderful." I was like, "Oh, this is really hard." So I was getting better business skills. I was reading a lot about that too. How do you make a business work? And so I started to focus on tomatoes, which appeared to be the crop that was most likely to be able to make a living at, and simpler. So if we just went to greenhouse crops, I wouldn't need to hire 15 people, and the people I did hire could be year-round. And we became wholesalers. Big change. Yeah. So I'm never sure if it was the right change.
Why? What gives you pause?
I really envy people with successful CSAs, mm-hmm. and they know their customers. They're worshipped by their customers. There's tremendous loyalty. Even with a farm stand, you have tremendous loyalty. I sell to supermarkets and co-ops. Some of them will take you out back and cut your throat on a bet, it's a tough business out there.
Yeah.
And the supermarket buyers aren't world famous for their loyalty. I appreciate they're in a tough position. They're fighting each other. They're working on these razor thin margins. And I've seen people not carry our tomatoes after carrying them for years because of price, and we can get them cheaper over there. And I go, yeah, but those are much worse. And they go, we know they are. We know yours tastes much better. We get it, but we know they're hydroponic and they shouldn't be certified, but they are. So, you know, it's a tough business. It's a different business, and I would say it's not quite as easy to sleep at night, which is okay. I don't sleep so well anyway.
So not as easy to sleep because do you feel like you've left in some? I'm beginning to get the sense that you felt like in some way you had left the organic world, and so this Real Organic project in some sense brought you back to the focus on organic?
I didn't feel like I'd left the organic world at all, but I mean, there's lots of people who are real organic farmers who are wholesalers. And, you know, once people get above a certain scale, if they choose to farm on that level, that scale, I don't mean to put any kind of, you know, moral meaning on it, like bigger is better or you're more real or anything. I don't believe that. Certainly Elliot Coleman is one of my true heroes, and he's a very small farm, and you know, certainly all his customers know him, even if he doesn't know all of them. And you know, J.M. Fortier is another great, brilliant, you know, younger than me farmer who's done a great job in teaching other farmers how to farm and building a movement. So it's not that bigger is better, but you know, many people buy their food in stores. And I don't want to abandon the stores. I want us to have real organic food in them too. What is true is that when you become a wholesaler, you lose control and you lose that intimate connection that is wonderful. So, you know, it's always better if you can know your farmer. It's even better if you can grow it yourself, right? But nobody grows all their own food, and nobody knows their farmer all the time. Not if you eat anything that came from, you know, bananas or coffee or cocoa, you know, chocolate or, you know, oranges. And you know, there's a legitimate conversation about all of that. But even in Vermont, which is kind of this haven of buying local, even in Vermont, even in the summer, the vast majority of food in Vermont is bought at supermarkets, and it's not local.
Right.
And in the winter, virtually all of it. Now we have winter CSAs, so for people who care, they can at least get some of their greens or vegetables, or maybe their meat, milk, eggs, you know, more directly. But the food system is huge. We can't get crushed by not being able to fix everything, but we should be working towards solutions. That's what I believe.
So you've always been both a farmer and an activist. Do you see this? I mean, you were active, you said, as a young man in the anti-nuke movement. Do you see?
I was going to say I haven't been an activist, but yes, it was that. Yeah.
Oh, you know, to the point where you got arrested. And, you know, jailed for 10 days. So I'm wondering, how farmer and activist came together in this point of your life.
There was a real separation there because when I really started to farm here at this land, and, you know, you just work all the time. And then when I got a kid, and then another kid, again, I'm just like every other farmer. And they work all the time, and oftentimes, you know, they don't make minimum wage. Some are better at business than others. And that's a whole different skill set from being good at growing food. But I didn't have room for activism, and I get it. I deal with farmers all the time now, and they don't have room. I'm older. I turn 68 next week.
Wow.
Right? I know. It's amazing.
That's wild.
And my farm is mature. I have a crew that you know, if I went fishing for 2 weeks, they'd be fine. It's not like it used to be where the whole world would end if I took half a day off, is how it felt. So I'm in a place where the farm is successful enough. My kids are grown, and one of them's still working on the farm right now. But basically they're both gone, and I have the resources to do this, and I'm grateful for that. It's been an enormously rewarding, interesting way to grow in my life, in my world. I don't really have a desire to retire from farming, but I'm very glad that I have enough room in my life to do this as well.
One of the things that you've done in addition to the organic project is you were one of the first farmers, I think, in Vermont to enact a $15 minimum wage for all of your workers. And I wonder how you came to that decision. And I saw you at a living wage panel where the lieutenant governor of the state said he didn't feel like he could afford to do that on his farm, and
But he supported it.
But of course.
Yeah.
How did you get to that point, and what role do you think your farm and this movement plays in that dimension of, the wholeness and, for lack of a better term, realness, right? Where does that fit into real organic?
I think there are many real organic farmers who cannot afford to pay $15 an hour. So I want to just be really clear that, and I don't, the reason that I'm able to do that is because we've been able to build a situation in which we are supported by our customers to do that. To be honest, they don't know about that. Mm-hmm. In fact, I haven't posted anything on our website in 8 years. And I've never posted anything about our farm on our Facebook page. I am always only posting stuff about the Real Organic Project. It's my focus. So I'm not selling the fact that our people are paid more to our customers, but I should be.
You should be.
And I should be, because it's important that people understand that most farm workers don't get paid a living wage. And the only way they can be is if the eaters demand that they should be, and that they're willing to pay the price so that they can be. About the Immokalee workers. I read about it in your book. Yeah. And, the great thing where these really oppressed workers on these big farms down in Florida growing tomatoes. Yep. And they're, going to the farm owners and saying, we need to get paid more. We can't live like this. And the farm owners said, we can't afford to pay you. We got to get paid more too in order for that to happen. And the Immokalee workers rather brilliantly went to organize to the end users and said, we need you to pay a premium to go towards bettering our situation. And if you'll do that, we'll hold hands in public. And if you don't, we're going to make you weep. And it was really brilliant, I thought, because it was going to these huge corporations who absolutely could afford. And I think they were just saying, we're going to charge like 1 more cent.
It was a penny a pound.
A penny a pound for these tomatoes, and that penny goes to the workers. Right. And so people could make not a great living. It's not a great living, but they can live. Yeah. So the point isn't necessarily the strategy in that case, but my point, I just had a meeting today about this, is that the only way that we can do this is with the active support of eaters.
And the big buyers.
And the big buyers, yeah. but for, let's say but if I sell my tomatoes in the store and I say, I'm going to raise the price by a nickel, and all of that nickel is going to go to the workers, I actually believe that most of our customers would gladly pay that nickel.
Oh, yeah.
But it's very hard to communicate that to our customers. We have thousands of customers. Right. Most of them have no idea who I am. Right. Right? It's great. We have a new cardboard pint that's come out. We're starting to get this wave of love mail and phone calls. And they still don't know who I am or who we are. They just somebody down in New York, we got a call last night from New York City saying thank you, so much. And I used to buy your tomatoes sometimes, but they're expensive. Now I will always buy them because I did not want to buy the plastic pint.
Right.
And they say, you sell little guys, but you are the good guys. So that was very sweet. That was very important for us to hear. But we didn't charge anymore. The pint cost us more.
Huh.
So that was our 1% for the planet. But we didn't charge anymore for it. But that's what we all need to do. We need to figure out a way where the eaters can say, you know what, we want the farm workers to be paid decent wages. We want to make sure that they are. We don't want to get ripped off here. But we will gladly pay an extra nickel if we know that that extra nickel is going to go to the workers. So that's the challenge that we face, just as we do with garments, just as we do with everything in our fast food culture. The people who are the victims are the workers and the animals. And the environment, which means everybody. Yes. Everybody is the victim. But it's not what we want. It's just how do we organize ourselves so that we can get what we want, where everybody does better.
That's great, Dave. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
Oh, God, I talk for hours, Annelise, but no, I think this is good.
All right. Thank you. How do I close this?
You say, thank you, Dave. I say, thank you so much, Annelise.
Thank you, Dave.
It's great talking with you.
It was wonderful to talk with you.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you'll subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review. A video version of this interview, as well as the full transcript with links related to our conversation, can be found at realorganicproject.org/episode 50. Please join us next time when our guest is U.S. Representative and Maine organic farmer Shelley Pingree. She currently serves on the House Subcommittee on Agriculture and Rural Development. To find a Real Organic farm near you, visit realorganicproject.org/farms, and see you next time.